I realize that I am already burnt out from making this movie.
You have to care about your work, and I care about my work, and I do what it takes to get the right people here, whatever it takes. I'm constantly thinking how to cover my ass. It's not really how do I make it good, it's how do I not make it bad. Not healthy, but it seems to work.
Meet Judd Apatow. You may not know his name, but trust me, you know his work.
Wait, you changed your name to McLovin?
Writer, director, producer, and honestly, one of the most important people in the history of American comedy. The films he made didn't just make people laugh, they made people feel something, and that wasn't an accident. That was everything he'd been working toward his entire life. This is how it happened. Judd was born in 1967 in Flushing, Queens, New York. Normal kid, normal family. His dad worked real estate, his mum ran in comedy circles. Nothing about his childhood screamed future filmmaker, and then he turned 12 and everything fell apart. His parents divorced, the family scattered, and Judd ended up alone with his father, whilst his mum moved away to work summers at a comedy club. No warning, no soft landing, just a kid left behind trying to make sense of it all. And here's the thing about losing someone, you hold on to whatever they had left behind. For Judd, that was comedy. It was the thing that reminded him of her. So slowly, without really meaning to, it became his whole world. By his teenage years, the obsession had completely taken over. He started a radio show, not because he wanted to be on the radio, but because it gave him an excuse to cold call the comedians that he admired.
How old were you when you interviewed me?
I was 15. Someone must have pressured you into, I would lie to everybody and act like my high school radio station was a real station.
Seinfeld, Howard Stern, Harold Ramis, and Gary Shandling. A teenager picking up the phone and calling his heroes. Most kids put posters on their walls, but Judd wanted a conversation. He wasn't waiting for the industry to find him, he was already going to find it. He would eventually enroll at USC and studied in the screenwriting program. Then, he dropped out after 2 years. He packed up, moved to LA, and ended up sharing an apartment with a broke, hungry, absolutely unknown comedian from the East Coast named Adam Sandler. Yes, the Adam Sandler. Two broke, ambitious wannabe comedians from the East Coast sharing an apartment in LA, dreaming of everything. It sounds like a setup to a film, but it's just what happened. Judd's first real break came through one of those cold calls he'd made years earlier.
And then I got a job writing the Grammys for Shandling. I met Shandling.
Wow.
And I
Now
wrote
that's a big
jokes for
break.
him.
And after this, he would land his first television role, writing for The Larry Sanders Show, a sharp, ahead of its time sitcom about the backstage chaos of a fictional late-night show. And working alongside Shandling would change how Judd thought about comedy entirely.
Out of the blue, I never asked Gary to direct. Just one day he just said, hey, you're directing the next episode.
Wow.
Shandling didn't really care about jokes for the sake of jokes. He cared about people, real, complicated, messy people, and the comedy that comes from actually knowing someone. Character first, always character first. Judd absorbed that completely, and you can trace that philosophy through every single thing he made afterwards. For the next 15 years, Judd kept working. He kept trying and kept failing. The Ben Stiller Show, sketch comedy, genuinely sharp, written alongside Bob Odenkirk, David Cross, and Ben Stiller himself, cancelled after one season. Then Freaks and Geeks. And this one requires a moment because it's so important. Freaks and Geeks was set in a Michigan high school in the 1980s, and on the surface, it looked like a dozen other teen shows that had come before it, except it wasn't anything like them. Where most teen shows give you archetypes, the cool kid, the nerd, the outcast, Freaks and Geeks gave you people, complicated, contradictory, painfully real people who didn't fit neatly into any category. The freaks weren't glamorous, the geeks weren't redeemed by the end of the episode. Nobody got the girl in a clean, satisfying way. It was messy and honest and genuinely unlike anything else on television at the time. And then you have the cast. Seth Rogen, Jason Segel, James Franco, Linda Cardinelli, Martin Starr, and so many more. Almost none of them were known actors at the time.
14 mounted toms, 6 floor toms, 10 cowbells.
4 rides, 5 snares, man. A roto-tom rack.
But Judd saw something in them. That instinct, the ability to look at a room of unknowns and understand exactly what each one of them was capable of, it would go on to define his entire career going forward. This was where Judd found his people, not just actors but collaborators, a group of people who understood the specific kind of truth that he was trying to put on screen, who could be trusted to show up and do something real with it. That matters more than people realise. The best creative work rarely comes from talent alone. It comes from the right people finding each other at the right time. NBC would cancel the show after one season, 18 episodes. The show had the lowest ratings on the network, and apparently that was enough. Paul Feig, who had created the show alongside Judd, later said that the cancellation still hurt decades later, and you can understand why. They had made something genuine, something that respected its audience, something that given time could have been extraordinary. The network looked at the ratings and pulled the plug before any of that had a chance to matter. It was the right show made at the wrong moment for the wrong audience metrics, and that's a particular kind of painful. Looking back at it now, it's finally getting the respect that it deserves. 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and you don't get that for something normal and boring. But Judd continued to do more. Life on Parole, not picked up. Undeclared, cancelled. North Hollywood, not picked up. 15 years, knock after knock after knock. And in between, he was ghostwriting rewrites on films like Happy Gilmore, The Wedding Singer, and Liar Liar. He was invisible inside other people's hits, never getting the credit, never getting the call when the film did well, just quietly, stubbornly, getting better. Most people would have stopped by now. Most people would have taken the hint, found something else, and moved on with their lives. Judd didn't. And the reason probably comes back to that 12-year-old kid in Queens who had nothing left but the thing that reminded him of his mum. When comedy is that fundamental to who you are, failure isn't really a reason to quit. It's just what Tuesday looks like sometimes. He kept going, and eventually, those normal days of failure became something else entirely. Quick pause. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It helps a ton. And drop a like, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now, back to it. When you spend 15 years learning in the dark, you develop a certain kind of clarity. You find exactly what works and why. You've made every mistake already, and you're ready to prove to the world what you can do. In 2005, Judd Apatow finally put his name onto something big. The 40-Year-Old Virgin, written alongside Steve Carell and directed by Judd. And the way it was made tells you everything about his approach. This wasn't Steve handing Judd a script and walking away. They built it together, sat in rooms together, pulled from real life, real relationships, real awkwardness. The film feels alive because it is alive. It was made by people who genuinely cared about the characters inside of it. It hit #1 at the box office, $175 million globally, on a $26 million budget. After 15 years of closed doors, Judd Apatow had finally kicked one open. And then came Superbad. Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg had written that script as teenagers. They'd been sitting on it for years. Judd believed in it completely, but no studio would touch it, so he'd done something quietly brilliant. He convinced Rogen and Goldberg to write Pineapple Express first, something more commercially straightforward, easier to sell. Then he used the success of Talladega Nights, where he'd served as producer, to build leverage with Sony, and with that leverage, he got both films greenlit. He used one film as a bargaining chip to get the other one made. That's not just producing, that's someone who understands the game well enough to rewrite the rules of it. Superbad would go on to define a generation of comedy, and it almost didn't exist. And it does exist, largely because of Judd Apatow. He wouldn't slow down after this, he couldn't. Knocked Up, Pineapple Express, film after film, hit after hit. By 2007, industry insiders weren't talking about Judd Apatow the filmmaker, they were talking about Apatow as a brand, a guarantee. The guy who had spent 15 years knocking on doors had become the person that everyone was knocking for. The outsider had become the establishment. But it wasn't without friction. Knocked Up landed Judd in genuine controversy when Katherine Heigl publicly called the film a little sexist, a criticism that got a lot of attention. Judd's response was measured. The film wasn't about women at all really, it was about men who were terrified of growing up. men who use humor to avoid responsibility, men who can't quite become what they're supposed to be. And here's why that matters, because that tension, men refusing to grow up, runs through almost everything Judd has ever made. It's the thread connecting his best work, and eventually it's part of what unraveled him. In 2009, Judd made a film that nobody quite knew what to do with. Funny People. Darker than anything he'd done before, longer, quieter, more personal. A film about a famous comedian facing a terminal diagnosis, reckoning with a life half lived and a career built on making other people laugh while feeling completely hollow inside.
I also wanted to write about observing my mom when she was sick and how when she didn't think she was going to live, she seemed happier.
Commercially, it struggled. $54 million against the 40-year-old Virgin's $175 million. Summer audiences has shown up expecting Knocked Up and got something that asked them to sit with morality instead. But critically, it was arguably his best work. That gap between what audience wanted and what Judd was making tells you everything. Because Funny People wasn't really a film about a comedian. It was Judd working something out in public. The emptiness of fame. What comedy costs you personally, and whether any of it actually means anything. He was processing something, and he put it on screen before he'd even fully understood it himself. In hindsight, it was a turning point. At the time, most people missed it entirely. The question it quietly raised, one that would only become louder as the years went on, was this. Was Judd outgrowing his audience, or was his audience outgrowing him? So Judd did what he knew how to do. He kept working. Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Get Him to the Greek, Bridesmaids, This Is 40, all of them carrying the same DNA, real people, real relationships, real discomfort wrapped in a comedy that felt genuinely human. Films you could watch on a Saturday night and still be thinking about on a Sunday morning. And in 2012, that instinct for authenticity led him somewhere new. He watched a low-budget independent film by a largely unknown 25-year-old named Lena Dunham, and immediately backed her, helping her get her show Girls greenlit by HBO, just like that. The ability to spot something real and back it without hesitation had been there from the beginning. It's the same instinct that got Superbad made, that turned Seth Rogen from a teenager with a script into a household name. Judd had a gift for recognizing truth in other people's voices. But Girls also opened something that Judd couldn't ignore. The show faced real criticism around representation, and Judd himself later reflected that his entire body of work, the films that had defined his career, followed an almost exclusively male perspective. The Apatow universe, male friendships, male anxieties, male reluctance to grow up. He was beginning to look back at his own work differently. In 2015, Judd directed Trainwreck, a romantic comedy written by and starring Amy Schumer. It was sharp, it was funny, and it worked. But a telling review in The Atlantic made a point that stuck. The film belonged to Amy Schumer, not its director. And that wasn't an insult exactly, but it was a signal. The man who had once built an entire comedy universe from scratch, who had written, shaped, and stamped his personality onto everything he touched, was now functioning as a skilled, supportive, largely invisible hand behind someone else's vision. The same thing that he'd been doing back in those uncredited rewrite years, just with his name on the poster this time. Trainwreck didn't kill Judd's career, but it marked the beginning of something shifting in what he wanted to make, in how often he wanted to make it, and whether the industry still needed him in the way that it once had. The role was slowing, and the question of what came next didn't have a clean answer. By 2015, the comedy landscape that Judd had built looked completely different to the one that he started in. And that's not failure, that's just time. The truth is that Judd changed Hollywood so thoroughly that it eventually stopped needing him. The mid-budget comedy, that sweet spot of $30 to $50 million, R-rated, character-driven, original storytelling, simply stopped being viable in cinemas. Marvel absorbed the audience that used to show up for those films, and streaming fragmented the rest. And studios, always chasing certainty, stopped greenlighting the kind of messy, human, unguaranteed films that Judd had built his entire career on. And it wasn't unique to him, it was happening to everyone. Adam McKay pivoted to prestige drama. Paul Feig moved towards bigger, broader comedies. Edgar Wright retreated into cult filmmaking. The ecosystem that had made The 40-Year-Old Virgin and Superbad possible, that specific window in culture where those films could exist and thrive, quietly closed. Not with a bang, just with a slow, barely noticeable shift in what the industry decided it wanted. And then there were the people. Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg took everything they'd learned and built their own creative universe. Platonic, the studio, a whole body of work that carries Judd's fingerprints, even when his name isn't anywhere near it. Jason Segel stepped back from Hollywood almost entirely, eventually resurfacing on his own terms with Shrinking. Paul Rudd disappeared into the MCU and presumably a large vault of money. James Franco imploded. Allegations, lawsuits, a retreat from the industry that once celebrated him. Jonah Hill made mid-90s and stepped deliberately away from the comedic roles that had defined him and started building something quieter and more personal. One by one, the people that Judd had gathered, believed in, and launched outgrew the films that had made them, or the world changed around them, or both. There's something genuinely warming and quietly heartbreaking about that. His greatest legacy, the careers that he shaped, is also the thing that made his particular style of filmmaking impossible to sustain. He built people up so well that they didn't need him anymore. His kids left home, and the house felt different after that. And here's where it gets strange. Go back to Funny People 2009, a film about a famous comedian staring down his own morality, reconnecting with the people he'd lost along the way, and trying to figure out whether any of it had actually meant something. At the time, it read as an ambitious misfire, too long, too dark, too self-indulgent for a summer crowd. But watch it now, with everything that came after, the collaborators moving on, the genre disappearing, the industry changing shape. And it doesn't feel like a film anymore, it feels like a confession. Judd was telling us something in 2009 about where he was headed, what he feared, and what he was quietly working through. We just weren't ready to hear it. He processed his own ending before it happened. That's either the mark of a great artist or a deeply self-aware one. Probably both. In 2017, Judd went back to stand-up. One man, a microphone, a stage. The exact same thing that had saved a 12-year-old kid who just lost his family. It wasn't a desperate move. It wasn't a comeback in the traditional sense. It was something quieter than that. A man returning to the thing that was always most true, after years of operating at a scale that had slowly moved him further and further from it. And even today, Judd hasn't stopped. He's just changed shape. His films became fewer, the public profile got smaller, more considered. He shifted into producing, backing other people's voices. Lena Dunham, Pete Davidson, Amy Schumer, stepping into a guardian role rather than a driving force. And honestly, that was what he was always best at underneath everything, finding something real in someone else and giving it a place to exist. He started writing books, collecting conversations with comedians he'd grown up admiring. And somewhere along the way, without even maybe realizing it, Judd Apatow started becoming the Gary Shandling of his generation, the wise, slightly weathered figure in the background, the one who picks up the phone when a younger talent calls, the mentor, the safe pair of hands that understands the difference between a joke and the truth. The kid who cold called Gary Shandling as a teenager is now the person younger comedians cold call. That's not decline, that's full circle. And full circles, if you're paying attention, are the most satisfying endings there are. And here's what's easy to forget. The films Judd Apatow made weren't supposed to last. They were the kind of films that critics respected but didn't exactly revere, mainstream enough to be dismissed by the art crowd, too raw and unpolished to be called prestige. They existed in this uncomfortable middle ground that nobody quite knew how to categorize. And yet, ask anyone who was between 15 and 30 in that golden window, roughly 2005 to 2015, and those films are embedded, not just remembered, embedded. The quotes, the scenes, the specific feeling of watching Superbad for the first time with your friends, or seeing something in Knocked Up that felt uncomfortably close to your actual life. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when someone is telling the truth. What Judd understood, maybe better than anyone working in comedy at that time, was that people don't just want to laugh. They want to feel seen. They want to watch someone on screen make the same stupid mistakes that they make, want the same things that they want, and be just afraid and as lost and as hopeful as they are. Comedy was just a delivery mechanism. The real thing underneath it all was always recognition. And that's what's gone now. Not forever, maybe, but right now, in this current moment, the mid-budget film about a real person living a real life, funny and sad and unresolved in the way that real life actually is, that film doesn't really get made anymore. It doesn't get a theatrical release. It doesn't get the marketing budget. The economics just don't work. So what's left is this strange, quiet absence. Those films existed in a specific window of time, made by a specific group of people for an audience that was ready to receive them. That window has closed, and no amount of nostalgia is going to reopen it. What Judd Apatow leaves behind isn't a franchise, isn't a cinematic universe, it's something harder to quantify and probably more valuable. A decade of films that made a generation feel less alone, that trusted audiences to handle something real, that proved repeatedly that the most commercial thing you can do is simply tell the truth. That's the legacy. Not the box office numbers, not the careers launched, just simply the stubborn, quietly radical idea that honest comedy about ordinary people actually matters. It did then, it still does. We just don't make it like that anymore. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.